or database query and so forth. And then it would send that off to the back. We have a thread pool that processes this information and then sends that information back through a callback function and then sends that off to the user. So the IO cycle occurs right here in this area between the event loop and the back thread pool here. So let's go and take a look at an example of this IO cycle and see how and why it is important in the node event loop. Okay, so back in the Visual Studio Code here, make sure we're going to go into the demo folder, and I'm going to create a new file in here. So if you select a folder here, just click the icon at the top that says new file, and I'm going to call this just iocycle.js. Okay, and then so first I want to show you why asynchronous is so important. But first, let's just run a very simple code here to run the asynchronous process. So let's just say here I have a total equal to 0. Very simple operation. We'll let n equals to 1. All right, and then basically you want to just say I have a function here. Call it just say print, or just say print. And in this function, I'll just print basically the result. It's going to say, I'll do a total equals in, let's just say times 10, right? And then we print to the console. I'll put here total, and I put here the total. Very simple like that. And then I'll put a function at the bottom, and then up here, so it's much cleaner, I'm just going to invoke the function print. Very straightforward. All right, so let's go ahead and run in the command prompt. Let's go to the command terminal. Make sure again I'm going to the demo folder. And then here is my file, the IO cycle. So to run this in node, you just basically type the keyword node, followed by space and the name of the file, or the package, or we call it the module. And ours is called IO cycle. And you can put the .js extension if you want. It's optional. You don't have to use it. You just do that. That's fine too. Okay, so if I hit return, I get a total of 10 as expected. Nothing unusual here. It's pretty just straightforward JavaScript. Now, what happens when I say I call this print function inside between lines 2 and 3? Okay, we can kind of tell that it's not gonna work because why? Because n was not defined when we called the function, right? So if I save that and go back to the terminal and run the command again, you just press the up arrow key to load that previous command and run, and there it is. So we have the error says, make this a little bit bigger. It says, cannot access n because n is not been initialized. Okay. Well, the reason is because, of course, if you look at this code here, sequentially order from top to bottom. It executes line 2. It goes to the print function. It goes in here and there's n. Where is n? And this hasn't been declared yet. So we declare n after the print function call. So that is the error. In this case, it's a sequential, or you run the code synchronously. Okay. So to fix this, you saw earlier, you put the n above. Or you can, because sometimes you may not have that luxury, right? So what you do is you can call this function asynchronously. And you can do that easily by using one of these functions called the set timer. So I'm going to go here and put set time out. Inside here, you call a callback function, the print. You don't want to invoke it, just call that function, and you put a time of 0 milliseconds. Now, you put 0 or 1, doesn't matter. I think the default, if you put a 0, anything less than 1 will be defaulted to 1 anyway. So that should be fine. So if I save this now and go back to my terminal, and let me clear my console here. So up arrow key 2 times and run it. And you see that now everything comes back to normal as before, even though I declare and define my letter or my variable n after the function call. So what happens here is that when you call this timeout function, it triggers the asynchronous call. It sends off this function, this callback function, outside of this loop or this event loop here. So at that instance, you have at least guaranteed one iteration through the entire cycle. And during that process, n has now been declared and set to 1. And so when this whole process, all this code here gets run, by the time you end down here at line 8, and it goes back to the print function, and then it executes the code in here. And so when you run lines 10 and to 11, the n has not been set to 1, and so therefore everything runs very smoothly. That's how asynchronous works. Okay. Now there is another function called setImmediate, and I'll put it here to illustrate this. Let's write another function. I'm going to copy this. Okay, I put it down here, and we'll call it print2. Oh, let's make this print1 and then print2. And in print2, I'm not going to do, I'll do the multiplication as well. But let's just say in print1, when I call it, after I call the print1, down here, I'm going to increase n by 1. So I update by 1. Here I don't, right? And just to make sure it works, we just put here total 1 and then total 2. Okay. So two functions does similar things. And then now one function we'll call the timeout. The other one we say setImmediate. And also call the print function. This time we call it print2. So 1 here and then 2 here. Okay. Okay, so save this and go and run in the command again. So up arrow key. So you see that now it runs the print2 first. Because I run the print2, as you can see, print2 did not update n1 in. So I run print2, and then n was not been changed. And then I go back and run print1, and then now n is still 1, so I get 10 times 1, so I get a 10, 10. If I do it again, now you see it's different. Now it runs print1, and then I update n, so my n is now 2. And now when I print n2 at this function, immediate, then I get a total of 20. Okay, so you see the point here, right? If I go again one more time in the console, you see that it goes 10, 10 again, back to 2, 1, 1, 2 again. If I keep doing that, you see that these functions these calls are happening arbitrarily, right? So they are non-deterministic because they are not part of the I/O cycle. They're just within the main module, so therefore these two are in a race here. So what if you want to control so that this will always run first before this, right? Well, to do that, then we need to usually use this. These are really important in the I/O cycle. So let's just go back up here and modify my code a little bit here. I'm going to use the I/O cycle. To do that, I need to fetch a library called the file system library. On the very top here, I'm just going to say left fs equals to require the fs library, the file system. And so now I'm going to put these two function calls inside the I/O cycle. I put here I/O cycle. And so I'll call a function. I'm going to read a file first. So the file I want to read is just one of these here. Maybe I'll just call the index file. I just read it. And I'll put here, it's just fs.read. As you can see, if you read file, there are two functions you can use here. One is the synchronous one, and one is the asynchronous. The first one is the asynchronous one, and that's the one we want to use. Okay. And so this asynchronous here takes the file name. In this case, it would be just the index.js. And then the second parameter I want to use here is a function call, a callback. So I'll use the anonymous function, use the arrow key here. And inside this function, I'll put these two commands inside it. Okay. And you can just press, right click, and then format data, so your code will be formatted nicely for you automatically. Okay, so let me just clean up a little bit here. If I save this now, right, notice I'm calling the timeout first and then the immediate second. Before, we saw that these two functions run in any order because they're not bound to the I/O cycle. So you have no control of it. So now you see that this is difference between the two here. Now let's go back to the command terminal, and let me clear my console here and run the file again. Okay, so now you see that the total 2 gets run first before the total 1, because the total 2 is this immediate callback function, right? It calls that first before the first one. If I do it again, okay, you see they always get the same result. Always call the 2 first before the 1. So this tells us that this immediate function always gets the highest priority in the I/O cycle. Right after the phase 4, the poll is done, then the next cycle, which is cycle 5, is the check cycle. You will run this command first before any other timers, including the time interval, set timeout, So those 3 major timers. So this is something really important you can take advantage of when you read data in this sense. Maybe you want to process something first before you do the other ones, because they can happen arbitrarily. So again, just show you a really simple of the IO cycle, how these timers are used inside this IO cycle, and also how asynchronous works in the Node.js environment. So in the next video, we'll explore the Node.js module and see how it's structured, and eventually how you can create your own module in Node.js.